What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the first-person shooter tutorial series, we're going to be going over projectile drop. So to this point in the series, we disabled our projectile gravity for weapons that we didn't want to have it, but now we can actually add the ability to have drop on our projectiles. So for example, if I come back here and I shoot a projectile right at this zombie's head, or right around that area, you'll see it hits them a little bit lower than that, and that's because that's the drop I have on the weapon. If I go a little bit farther back, there's more time for drop. It'll hit the zombie even lower. So you can see it hits them right around the waist area, or somewhere around there. Now, if I pick up the hit scan weapon, which is this weapon right here, and try to shoot with it, well, it's a hit scan. It doesn't have any projectile drop. It shoots right where we are aiming it. If I pick up the submachine gun, I've added more drop to it, and these kind of fly out and go straight to the ground, which is a little silly. Your weapon probably won't have that much drop unless you have something like a grenade launcher. However, you can see how fully customizable we have made this system. So that's what we're going to be covering today, projectile and bullet drop, in our first-person shooter tutorial series. If you want to get caught up in the series, you can click this link right here in the top right corner, check out everything we've done, shooting, aiming down sights, picking up different weapons, and all that good stuff. If you only care about projectile drop, I'd recommend you watch this episode right here, which is where we went over projectile speed. And that is another thing that you can configure on your weapons and for each type of ammo. And it's in the same vein as this, so it is quite worth it to watch that and know what's going on. With all that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. So this is a code and blueprint tutorial series. We're going to do the majority of the work in the code today and then just set our values in the blueprint. So let's go to Visual Studio, and specifically we're going to go to our base weapon.h. This is my default weapon. All my weapons are children of this class. So if we come in here and we scroll down to our variables, you'll see that we had things in here already like damage, projectile speed, and we're going to do that same sort of process. We're going to add a projectile drop-off in here. Yes, the ammo type itself could have the drop-off. However, the weapon that is shooting the projectile is what is giving it the drop-off, because you could have two weapons that use the same ammo type, and they have different drop-offs, depending on the speed, depending on the way it launches the projectile. So I like to put it inside the weapon instead of inside the ammo. As the comment says, this is the base projectile drop-off when fired from this weapon. I made it a U property of edit anywhere, blueprint read write with a category of weapon. That way we can access it and change it in the blueprint. And it is a float called projectile drop-off. I made it a float because this is going to directly affect the gravity scale of the projectile, and if you make it something like an integer, the values are pretty far spaced apart. You can get a really big difference between something like 1 and 2. So I'd recommend that you make this a float. And that's the variable that we need. We want to go ahead and set a default value for this in the constructor, even though we are going to set it on each individual weapon as well. So I'm going to go to my base weapon.cpp, go to the constructor where I set all my default values. In here, I have added the projectile drop-off and set it equal to 1.0 by default. So just 1 of the gravity scale is essentially what this means. Of course, we'll cover this and go over this in a few minutes when we actually see what changes to this value actually do. But 1.0 is a good starting point. It's a good default value for all weapons. Now with that set, we do need an actual drop on the ammo itself, but that will be what drop off it actually needs. It doesn't need to be used to set anything. It's what amount of gravity scale we're going to apply to the ammo. So let's go to our projectile itself. For me, that is base ammo. And so I'm going to go to my base ammo.h file right here. And in here we had the speed before. This was the movement speed of the projectile at the current time. We're going to do the same thing for drop-off, where we have the current drop-off of the projectile. This is also a U property. I made it edit anywhere, blueprint read write with a category of ammo, but I've also added this other tag, meta equals expose on spawn equals true. Meta allows you to open up a few other options, and expose on spawn will allow us to set this variable as soon as we spawn an instance of this class. So as soon as we spawn a type of ammo, we will be able to set the drop-off amount. This is good because when we spawn the ammo, it's most likely being fired from our weapon, and so we want to know what the drop-off would be immediately. That way we can start applying it as soon as possible. And I called this float drop-off. Now we can go into the base ammo.cpp and go to the constructor and set the default value for this as well. Again, 1.0 is fine. It's going to be set by what weapon fires it. Just make sure it has some default value, so if for whatever reason it can't be read from the weapon, it doesn't just fly with no gravity scale at all. One other thing I want to do real quick is go into the base weapon.h and change some of my categories. I've made them all weapon. I did want to change them for the new ones we've been doing where it's all the stats of the weapon. So things like reload time, I'm going to say stats. And fire rate is going to be stats. Damage is going to be stats. Weak point damage multiplier is going to be stats. Projectile speed, stats. And projectile drop off, stats. Burst fire time between can also be stats. I'm sure there are others in here that work with that, but just to break it up a little bit, almost everything in this file was going to weapon, and it was this huge list that makes it harder for me to show you the new stuff that we're working on when we look at it in the blueprint, so I just wanted to change that category. That's not required for any reason, but if you want to change it and make it look like mine, there you go. I'm doing it now. At this point, I'm going to load the editor back up. Alright, the editor is back open, so now we want to go to each of our individual weapons. I'm going to go into my weapons folder. I'm going to start with my base weapon. Now, my base weapon technically is the wrapper class for my other weapons, my assault rifle and my submachine gun. However, it actually has the default pistol or blaster from Unreal as well. So once I open up my base weapon BP, you can see here is my blaster, and if I click the class defaults, I will get the details panel right here. Now I can see all of my variables. You see they are in the new stats category. And here we have things like our projectile speed, reload time, all that good stuff, and now projectile drop off. So we want to change this value to whatever we want for this weapon. Since this is the base weapon, if I change this, it will change all children classes, so we should do this one first, set it to the value we want, and then override the children classes. So in my case, I've chosen a value of 0.2, but if I set the projectile drop off to something much higher and use the blaster, something like 0.8, you'll see that the projectile falls much shorter. So I can change it to whatever value I want. I'm going to keep it at 0.2 for the base. Now let's go and set this value for the other blueprints as well. So this is my assault rifle blueprint. And in here, I have the same stuff, so stats, and the projectile drop off is set to 0.2. However, if you look up above, this is actually a hit scan weapon, not a projectile. So there is no need to use the drop off. We're not going to implement it here. It is technically possible to have some sort of hit scan weapon that also has a curve to it. However, that drop off will function differently if you plan on implementing that, and that is not going to be covered in today's episode. Just to show you though, it is this weapon, and it doesn't matter what I have for my drop off. You could actually put 0 if you'd like, just to indicate even further there's no drop off on that weapon. Now we want to go to our submachine gun, which does shoot projectiles, and it will have drop off. So class defaults, projectile drop off. Now this is set to 1.0. 1.0 is a lot. That's why you saw it just absolutely falling right away. So you see it can barely make it to where I'm aiming. If I change it even higher, like 2.0, then you're going to see they drop almost immediately. They can't even make it to the enemy from here. So that value is probably too high. I will make it something like 0.75 so you can see the difference in the series, but even that's going to be really high. Now, you can technically go into your ammo types as well, and you could mess with this and change these values, but you don't have to for any reason. So if you go to your class defaults in your base ammo BP, you will see the speed and the drop off, but this is going to be set by what the weapon sets it to, so you don't actually have to change it in any of these defaults. Speaking of base ammo BP, let's go to that and let's go to base weapon BP, because we're going to need to do logic in both of these classes to actually transfer the drop off from the weapon to the ammo. In base weapon BP, in the event graph, there is an event fire weapon that determines if the weapon is projectile or hit scan. If it's projectile, it comes into this logic here where we determine if we're aimed down sights or not. That way we can spawn the projectile at the correct spot. Regardless of which path is chosen, spawn projectile at crosshairs is called. Different things are passed into it, but the same function is being called. We want to go into that function, spawn projectile at crosshairs, And we're getting the location, the rotation, or where to spawn this, and then we eventually call spawn actor with the specific type of ammo that we are spawning. So it could be assault rifle ammo, submachine gun ammo, or whatever other type of ammo you have. Now in here, these spawn actor nodes, you saw we were setting the owner, the speed, and some other variables. You should have drop off in here because in the code, in baseammo.h, we were setting the drop off to be exposed on spawn. So when we are spawning an ammo type or a child of it, it should have this drop-off node. If it doesn't, you can right-click and refresh the node, and it should pop up right here. At this point, we are in the base weapon BP, so we have access to our projectile drop-off variable that we made. So we can just get projectile drop-off and plug it directly into the drop-off. You can plug it in for all 3 of these spawn actors, or however many you have, because it's always going to relate to this weapon that we're in, and it will change as we pick up different weapons. Now, once we've set that, the ammo, as it is spawned, should have this value. We need to determine what to do with it, and we'll need to go into the base ammo BP to figure that out. So this is my base ammo BP. This is a true wrapper class, unlike my weapon, where it doesn't have an actual mesh or anything assigned to it. And so things like the assault rifle and submachine gun ammo are children of it. We want to do it in this class because all those ammo types do want to have this drop-off, at least have the ability to have this drop-off. And in the begin play of our base ammo BP, we were setting the velocity of the projectile based on the speed and the direction or the rotation that we should be using. We were doing this by using the projectile movement and setting the velocity on it based on the speed that was passed in to this actor upon spawning it. We want to do the same thing for the gravity scale of the projectile movement, just using the drop-off variable that was passed into it. So if we get our projectile movement component, and we drag off and say set projectile scale. Set projectile gravity scale is actually what it's called. So set projectile gravity scale. Then you click this, and you get your node to set it, and then you just use the drop-off, get drop-off, and pass it into the value. And you'll see I've added this to begin play right after setting the velocity. And now the gravity scale of the projectile will work with the actual drop-off that the weapon provided it. So when you come into the game, you will be able to see your drop-off. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you today, so I hope you enjoyed this episode of the first-person shooter tutorial series, and if you did, please subscribe. It does a ton for me in the channel. It's completely free, and I really appreciate it. If you'd like to support the channel further, like many of you kind souls already have, you can check out the YouTube membership, Patreon page, or Discord subscriptions to assist us in making the best channel and best series possible. Thank you for all the love and support to all you kind people who already have. If you had any issues with this episode or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I'd be happy to help, and it is completely free. There's a link in the description. Anyway, guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.